All right, Shmuel, say good morning, good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Teves, the Daf Yomi Shir, Emir Hashem, in memory of Mr. Milton Martyr, Mordechai David Ben Rafal, Kohen Zichron Lebracha, in the merit of Emir Hashem of our continued Daf Yomi Limud, may his neshama have an aliyah and the family a nechama. To thank Shirley Elbaum and family for dedicating all the shiurim this month, the commission of the yard site of Jerry Elbaum, Yaakov Couple, Ben Avram Menachem. Zichron Lebracha. We hope that the merit of our Talmud Torah, the neshama have an aliyah and the family a nechama. We also thank our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Nathan and Beth Adler, in memory of Mr. Milton Martyr, Zichron Lebracha, and Bennett Goldberg, in commemoration of the yard site of his father, Avraham Leib ben Asher Pinchas, Zichron Lebracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamas will have an aliyah and the families a nechama. With that, let us begin. Beautiful, beautiful daf ahead of us today. A lot to do. Today's daf is Samech Gimel 63. And we are picking up in Meretz Hashem at Samech Beis Amud Beis 62b at the Mishnah. So continuing on our same topic, Adak Katzir. So remember again, a person is making a neder, and these all come down in all these cases is a person is making a neder to extend for a particular duration. In these cases, the duration is linked to an agricultural event. So a person says, I'm not going to drink wine. Let's just go with the simple case. Konam yayin sheni toim ada katzir. I'm not going to go ahead and drink wine until the harvest season. Remember again, katzir generally refers to grain, specifically to eat. To eat. So I'm not going to drink wine ada katzir. So we'll say, so when does that neder extend until? Achiyas chila'am liktzar katzir chitin. We'll say that refers to the beginning of the wheat harvest. So that's the halacha. Ultimately, again, the beginning of the wheat harvest. So the Gemara says, aval lo katzir sa'orin, but it does not apply to the beginning of the barley harvest season. Good. So also remember again, barley is harvested before grain, right? We know this again because Pesach, Karban HaOmer, ultimately Shavuos, Shtei HaLechem. So therefore, a person makes a neder that I'm not going to go ahead and drink wine until the beginning of the harvest season. The assumption is harvest season refers to wheat. Hakol fi makom nidro. Now I will say now the Mishnah adds in another very important rule here, which is everything goes according to the place where the neder is being made. So for example, im haya bahar. If let's suppose say you're if you're on a mountain, right? You're in a mountainous region, then ultimately again the neder will be dictated by the agricultural cycle in the mountainous region. Vim haya bebika. And if you're in a valley, it's a valley. And I will say what that's saying is, let's say for argument's sake, the beginning of the wheat harvest season is earlier in the mountainous region than in the valley region. So how do you know what timeline to attach to your neder? It's very simple. What timeline do you attach? It's the location where you made the neder. If you look at the Ran, just for a moment, the Ran is across on the right-hand side, right across about 5 lines down. Hakol makom nidro, klor mistama, bechom makom mikri kitzir chitim. Aval makom nidro, hergulu likros liktar saorim kitzir stam. Hakol makom nidro, v'chei namim haya bahar. So the Ran actually gives two interpretations of this phrase. The Ran says either what this means is that, the first part of the Mishnah said that in general, when you make a neder not to drink wine until the harvest season means what? Harvest of what? Of wheat. The Ran says then the Mishnah qualifies this. That's assuming that in the place where you're making the neder, harvest season refers to the harvest of wheat. But for example, if you happen to be in a place where harvest season refers to the harvest of barley, then that's what will govern your neder. Then the Ran says in the second interpretation, it's not just what the harvest season refers to, but it's the harvest season as well, the timing of the harvest season as well, that is determined by the location. So therefore, I will say with the Mishnah introducing me really is the two things. The number one, definition of the particular agricultural season is determined by the place in which I'm making the neder. So in general, if I say, Konam yayin she'eni shosa ada katzir, I'm making a neder not to drink wine until when? The beginning of the wheat harvest season. But if I happen to be making the neder in a place where katzir means harvest of barley, then that's the definition of my neder. Similarly, the timing of the wheat harvest season also depends on where I currently am, where the neder is being made. Okay, the Mishnah goes on. Ada gishamim person makes a neder, I'm not going to go ahead and drink wine up until the rainy season, or ad shihu hagishamim, or until it is the rainy season. When does the neder extend? Until ad shetered v'rviyah shniya. Both say my neder extends until the second rain. The second rain. We'll see in the Gemara what that means. Rabbi Shmuel says, ad shiagia zman hasharaviyah. Both say very interesting. Rabbi Shmuel says, Tanakama makes it sound like the neder is in effect up until it actually rains a second time in the rainy season. Rabbi Shmuel says, no. What it means is up until the time of the second rain. Up until the time of the second rain. In other words, we'll say, even if it doesn't actually rain, up until the time of the second rain. Ad sheyifsku shamim. If I make a neder that says, I'm not going to drink wine until the rain is completed, until the rainy season is over, or I should say until the rain stops. Ad sheyetze Nisan kul dev Rabbi Meir. Meir says the neder is in effect until the end of Nisan. It's the end of Nisan. Rabbi Yehuda says Ad sheyavra Pesach. No, the neder is only in effect ultimately again until the end of Pesach. So I will say, so there, a machlokis as to how to interpret the phrase until the rains stop. Incredible. So I will say, says the Gemara Tanya. Hanodr ad hakayitz begalil v'yarad la'amakim. I'm supposed to listen to this case. I make a neder, not konim yain she'eni toim ad hakayitz. Remember again, going back to yesterday's daf. What does kayitz mean? What does kayitz mean? Fig harvest, right? So I go ahead and I make a neder not to go ahead and drink wine up until the kayitz. Now both say, I made this neder in the Galil. And then I go ahead and I relocate from the Galil to the valleys. So let's say for argument's sake, the fig harvest is earlier in the valleys than it is in the Galil. Even though again now I'm in the valleys and it's fig harvest time already. I can't drink wine until the fig harvest arrives in the Galil. I will say why? Why? So that's the Mishnah. What does the Mishnah teach me? That when you make a neder, and especially again when you link the neder to an agricultural event, the timing of the agricultural event is based on the location in which the neder was made. So therefore, again, even if you relocate during the duration of the neder, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. So halacha. Well, see, I'll give you a good example of this. Like, imagine for a moment you were to go ahead and say, I'm in America, and I make a neder. I'm not going to drink wine. It makes it a little more, maybe a little bit more applicable for us. I'm not going to drink wine until we begin to say the same Talmud Matar Livracha. Okay, so say in Eretz Yisrael, they begin saying the same Talmud Livracha on Zayin Cheshvan, right? And in America, we'll call it December 4th, December 5th, depending on the year. So now I make the neder in America. But now I find myself in Eretz Yisrael when they begin to say the same Talmud Livracha. What's the halacha? I can't drink wine until December 4th, the time that they begin to say it in America. Why? Because that's the location of my neder. So that's the principle that the Mishnah said and the example that the Gemara is trying to give over here. Incredible. Let's go weiter. So remember again, the last part of the Mishnah was as follows. If a person said, person said, I make a neder until the rain is finished. Oh, I'm sorry, I should take that back. If a person says, I take a neder not to drink wine up until the rain, or until it will be rain. So I will say, so Rabbi Shmuel said, Tanakama said, the neder is in effect until the actual second rain. Rabbi Shmuel says, until the time of the second rain. So here we go. Amar Rabbi Zera, Machlokes the Amar Ad Hagishamim. Rabbi Zera says the machlokes in the Tanakam Rabbi Shmuel is only in a case where he says Ad Hagishamim. I take a neder not to drink wine up until the rains. Aval Amar Ad Hageshem. But if I say I won't drink wine up until the rain, singular, Ad Zman Gishamim Ka'amar. Everyone agrees that Allah said that neder is only in effect until when? Until the beginning of the rainy season. So I will say, so this is really a fascinating idea, right? You hear this distinction? So Allah said the Mishnah says like this. The Gemara says like this. We have a machlokes in the Mishnah. I make a neder not to drink wine until what we call, let's just keep it easy, adagishamim, until the rains. How do you interpret that phrase? Tanakama means literally until the second rain. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, the time of the rain. Zman Sharavia, the time of the rain. Right? Now comes along Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera says that's only because you're saying up until the rains, plural. Plural, that's where there's machlokes. But if you say up until the time of the rain, everyone agrees when is your neder in effect up until the beginning of the rainy season. So let's analyze. Meisvei, so the Gemara raises the kasha, Ezu Zman Sharavia. I will say, what is Gemara Maseches Tainis? So now, what is the timing of the rains in Eretz Yisrael? Habechira begimel. So we'll say the first rain, the early rain, comes at the 3rd of Cheshvan. Beinonis b'shiva, the middle rain, right? The second rain comes on the 7th of Cheshvan. Afela be'esrim u'shlosha. Late rains come on the 23rd. 23rd. Divrei Meir. These words are Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says no. B'shiva, first rain on the 7th. B'shiva asar, second rain on the 17th. Ube'esrim u'shlosha, and then the 23rd. Rabbi Yossi says b'shiva asar. No, first rain on the 17th, second rain on the 23rd, and then third rain, the Chodesh Kislev. V'china Rabbi Yossi Omer, and Rabbi Yossi said, similarly again, he said, Eini yechidim misanin ad shiyagia Rosh Chodesh Kislev. And I will say, individuals do not begin to fast because of a lack of rainfall until Rosh Chodesh Kislev. V'amrin Allah, we say about this, Bishlam Ravia Rishona. So we'll say, I understand. We'll say, so why do we need, why do Chazal have to identify the 3 time periods for rain? Why is that necessary? So the Gemara says as follows: Bishlam Ravia Rishona. I understand why we have to identify the intended first timing for rain. Why? The Shail. Because I will say that's when you begin to say V'sein tal umatar livracha. That's when you begin to ask for rain. Shlishish lisanos. I understand why I need the third date. Why? What does the third date do? The third date tells you that if rain has not come by this point in time, we've hit a critical juncture, and therefore you have to fast. You have to fast. Elishnia lemai. But I will say, what purpose does the second date, right, the middle date, what does that serve? Ramizera lenoder. Oh, so you know what the second date does? The second date ultimately goes ahead and is important if a person made a neder. What kind of neder? If a person vowed to abstain from something up until the rains, so what does that refer to? That refers to the second rain. We say about this, Kiman Ozla Hadisanya. Rabbi will say whose opinion is reflected in the following statement. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, Gishamim sheyardu shiva yamim ze'achar ze'ah. Atamona bahen revia rishona ushnia. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says that if it rained for 7 days, right, 7 contiguous days, you could count in that the first and second rains. To which the Gemara says, Kiman Rabbi Yossi. That would reflect the view ultimately of Rabbi Yossi, because Rabbi Yossi has his dates are arranged in such a way that, for example, rain number 2 is 23, rain number 3 is Rosh Chodesh Kislev, 7 days in between that. So if it's rain for 7 continuous days, that can count as rains 2 and 3 according to Rabbi Yossi. That I will say, ultimately, again, the problem we have is this seems to pose a contradiction to Rabbi Zera, to which the Gemara says, no, Hahu da'amar adagishamim. That's talking about a case where ultimately, again, he says adagishamim. Now, what does that mean? Take a look at the Ran for just a moment. Take a look at the Ran. So we'll say the Ran is in the widest lines, second line in. Hahu da'amar adagishamim kilomar I amar ad hageshem einach inami to the kuli alma ba'ad shiagia zman sagi. Aval hacha b'mayaskinon do amar ad hagishamim. So I will say the Gemara wants to resolve as follows. The Gemara says that halacha l'maisa, the machlokes case. So remember again, we had these 3 opinions as to what exactly is the schedule for the rains, and it sounds like everyone is agreeing that the purpose of the first rain is to tell you when to begin to say Saint Talmud Livracha. Purpose of the third rain is if it has rain to tell you when to fast. What's the purpose of the second rain? Purpose of the second rain is for Nedarim purposes, that if you vow to abstain from something up until the rain, you have until the Neder is in effect until the second rain. The Gemara seemed to indicate that the way this is set up as a machlokes to or a steer to Rabbi Zera, to which the Gemara says, no, it's not a stira. Why? That's talking about a case that he said, Adagisham. So to pull this all together, what seems to happen is as follows. Based on the way the Gemara is understanding this is like this. The machlokes of the Mishnah as to the duration of a neder is when a person said, Konem yayin she'eni shose ad hagishamim. I will not drink wine until the rains. What does the rains mean, Rabbi Osai? So that's the machlokes in the Mishnah. One opinion says it means up until the actual second rain, up until the actual second rain. Rav Shmuel says you don't need the second rain, just what do you need? What do you need? The timing of the second rain. But Rabbi Zero says if you say ad hageshem, up until the rain, so the rain means what? Up until the beginning of the rainy season itself. I will say, how do we paskin halacha l'maisa? So if you take a look, you don't have to go, I'll read it to you. Rabbi Hilchos Nedarim, Perek Yud, Halacha Yud Aleph says as follows, right? It's the Rambam. Ha'oser atzal b'davar ad hageshem. This is the Rambam's case. I say, I'm not going to drink wine up until the rain. What does that mean? Hareza aser ad zman hageshamim, shu be'eretz Yisrael rosh chodesh kislev. So it's very interesting. So the way the Rambam understands ad hageshem really means up and through the rainy season, which takes me ultimately up until Rosh Chodesh Kislev. But ultimately, again, so we'll say the way the Rambam passes is a little bit different than the way the Gemara says. It's very interesting. So the Rambam says if you say ad hageshem is up until Rosh Chodesh Kislev. Right? They will say, what's the significance of Rosh Chodesh Kislev? So remember again, in Rabbi Yossi's model, Rosh Chodesh Kislev is the timing of the third rain. So if you say Ad HaGeshem, ultimately to Rosh Chodesh Kislev. Ad HaGeshamim, ultimately you're bound by the neder until what? It actually rains. Good. Says the Mishnah. Konim yayin shani toim l'shana. So it's actually an interesting case. If a person goes ahead and says, I take a neder, not to drink wine for a year. L'shana. And I will say, here's the interesting case. Nis'abra hashana. What happens if halacha l'maisa? Ultimately, again, it's now an Iber year, it's a leap year. So we'll say, what do you do with Adar Beis? What do you do with that? So what's the halacha? Asr ba u'be'ibura. Okay? You're asr in the entire year. You made a neder not to go ahead and drink wine for the year. That includes ultimately the leap month as well. Ad Rosh Adar. Now here's an interesting case. What happens halacha l'maisa if a person says, I'm not going to drink wine Ad Rosh Adar until the beginning of Adar, and then I will say what ends up happening? It's declared a leap year. So Ad Rosh Adar Harishon. So we'll say you're only bound by the neder up until the beginning of Adar Rishon. Adar Rishon, Ad Sof Adar. What happens if halacha l'maisa I say, I'm not going to drink wine up until the end of Adar? Then Ad Sof Adar Harishon, also only until the end of Adar Rishon. So we'll say, what do you see from this Mishnah? That ultimately, again, so halacha number one is if you made a neder not to drink wine for the year, and now what happens? It becomes a leap year. You're bound by the neder literally again until the calendrical end of the year. That's number one. Number two, if you go ahead and you mention, I'm making a neder up until Adar, even if it's declared a leap year, Adar means what? Adar means Adar Aleph. Adar means Adar Aleph, the first Adar. Good. Similarly, again, end of Adar, make an Adar, I'm not going to drink until the end of Adar. That refers to the end of Adar Aleph, the first Adar. So says the Gemara, Alma, this is very interesting, Alma, Stama da Adar, the Kama Rishonu. So we'll say, what do you see from here? What's the takeaway from Mishnah? Takeaway from Mishnah? So we'll say, when you say Adar, what does Adar refer to? Adar Aleph, first Adar. So unqualified Adar always refers to the first Adar. Okay. So we'll say our Mishnah must reflect the view of Rabbi Yehuda. Why? What did Rabbi Yehuda say? Disanya Adar Harishon Kosev Adar Harishon Adar Sheni Kosev Adar Stam de Rabbi Meir. So we'll say Rabbi Meir says that in general, when you're writing documents, it's actually quite interesting. When you're writing documents, so Adar Rishon is written as Adar Rishon. Adar Sheni is written as Adar Stam, unqualified Adar. So I will say, what do you see? According to Rabbi Meir, really, the primary Adar is which Adar? The second Adar. right? Which is really very, bless you, which is really very interesting. So he's saying when you date a star, so Adar Rishon is always referred to as Adar Rishon. Adar Sheni, the second Adar, is called Adar. So you see from here that primary Adar ultimately again is Adar Sheni. Rabbi Huda says no. Adar Harishon Kosev Stam, Adar Sheni Kosev Tinyon. So I'll say, so again, Rabbi Huda says no. Adar Rishon is really written as Adar, and Adar Sheni is written as Adar Sheni. So I'll say, what do you see? Rabbi Huda holds that the first Adar is the primary one. Therefore, I'll say it would appear that our Mishnah, which looks at the first Adar as the primary Adar, ultimately is reflective of the view of Rabbi Huda and not Rabbi Meir. To which the Gemara said, Rabbi, no, not necessarily. I feel Tim Rabbi Meir, it's a very simple distinction. Even Rabbi Meir, how do you reconcile it? Hadiyada de ma'abra shasa, hadalo yada. Fascinating, I will say. Two different cases. One is talking about a situation where you were aware of the leap year, and one is where you're not aware of the leap year. Meaning, I will say, the case of the Mishnah is where I'm not aware of the leap year. I will say, see, remember again, now we have an organized calendar. But remember again, there was a point in time in history where you didn't know it was a leap year necessarily at the outset. But remember again, when did Chazal enact it? When do you make a leap year? When do you make a leap year? So we have this interesting dynamic in our calendar, which is we know we have a lunar calendar. What's intriguing is our Yamim Tovim are based on the seasons. So for example, Pesach is called the Chag HaAviv. It's called the springtime season, the springtime Yom Tov. So what's the problem? The problem often comes up is if Chazal saw that Pesach was going to fall out during the winter, what do you do? You make an additional Adar. I will say that's why the leap month is always Adar. It's always Adar. Because the only reason you're making a leap year is in order to ensure that Pesach is coming out during the spring. So I'll say, so you could have a situation where at the outset of the year, you thought this was going to be a regular year. And then Lamaisa comes Chodesh Shvat or Chodesh Adar, they realize already, okay, we're going to need a leap year. So they insert a second Adar. Salacha Lamaisa, again, the Gemara says a very simple distinction. The case in the Mishnah, I will say, is where at the time of the Neder, I was unaware there was going to be a leap year. Right? I made this Neder in Tishrei. Right? As far as I know, in Tishrei, there's only one Adar. Then what happens? Right? Poof, they added another Adar. So what does the Mishnah say? I made a Neder, ultimately again, that I'm not going to drink wine until Adar. What does Adar refer to in my Neder? Adar Aleph. Why? I had no idea about an Adar Beis. I will say, but it could very well be that if I knew about an Adar Beis at the time of my Neder, then what? Enachinami, it would devolve, my Neder would devolve through, or would be in effect through Adar Beis. So therefore the Gemara says, I feel Rabbi Meir, our Mishnah could even reflect the view of Rabbi Meir. Why? Because ultimately, again, it could very well be that in a case where I knew about Adar Beis, that Enachinami, the Neder would extend through Adar Beis. We'll say Amud Beis. So Vatanya, so we'll say the Gemara brings us support to this. It's actually very interesting. Vatanya, the Gemara says, Ad Rosh Chodesh Adar Harishon. So we'll say the Mishnah says that if you make a Neder up until Rosh Chodesh Adar, when does the Neder extend until? It extends up until Rosh Chodesh Adar. I'm sorry. Go back just to Amud Alpha just for 1 second. I'm sorry. Just take a quick look at the Rush. The Rush is in the right-hand margin. I'm sorry. Hadiyad de Ma'abra Kishiyodesh Uberes Stam Adar Sheni Mashma. The Rush says, what the Gemara is suggesting now is, when you know that it's a leap year, Adar, Stam Adar, refers to the second Adar. This is very important. When you know it's a leap year, so Stam Adar, right, unqualified Adar, refers to the second Adar. Va'kol kisvei shtaros makirin be'ibra shana, hilchach kosen Adar Stam, u'masisi b'shelo yad be'ibura. So we'll say, what the Gemara is suggesting right now is as follows. There's a distinction between knowing about the leap year and not knowing about the leap year. When you know about the leap year, then Stam Adar is Adar Beis. It's Adar Beis. And therefore, for example, if you were to date a shtar during a leap year, you know about the leap year. If you write Stam Adar, that refers to Adar Sheni. If you want to write Adar Rishon, it has to say Adar Rishon. If you don't know about the leap year, then what? then ultimately again, Stam Adar is Adar Aleph. And therefore you'd have to label Adar Sheni as Adar Sheni. So we'll say a fascinating distinction. And again, it's logical. It's logical. You don't know about the leap year, both for Nedarim and for Shtaros. Stam Adar is going to be Adar Rishon, and Adar Sheni will be identified as Adar Sheni. You know about the leap year, Stam Adar is Adar Beis, Adar Sheni, the second Adar, and therefore again for Nedarim, if you write for Nedarim, if you make an Neder through Adar, it's going to be through Adar Beis, and even for dating of Shtaros, second Adar will just be listed as Adar Stam, just regular Adar. Adar Rishon will be identified as Adar Rishon. So now I'm sorry, back to the Amud Beis Vatani, we learned Ad Rosh Chodesh Adar, person makes a neder up until Rosh Chodesh Adar, Ad Rosh Chodesh Adar Harishon. This then, when does the neder devolve until? Until Adar Rishon. But if it was a leap year, Ad Rosh Chodesh Adar Hasheni. Ultimately, again, up until the neder will go up until Adar Sheni. So the Gemara says, Michlal Doreisha Labu Muberes Haskinon. Does that mean that the first part of the Brisa is not talking about a leap year? To which the Gemara says, Shmamina ha dipshitale dema abrashasa ha delo yada. So we'll say the Gemara suggests two different cases. One is where you knew about the leap year, and one is where you didn't know about the leap year. So we'll say the Gemara seems to be ending off with the same conclusion, namely that halacha l'maisa, everything depends on what you know at the time of your neder. So if at the time of your neder you knew it was a leap year, then and let's say again, remember, what's the neder in question? I'm making a neder, I'm not going to drink wine up until Rosh Chodesh Adar. So what's the shayla? When does my neder devolve until? Right? When does it go until? Rosh Chodesh Adar Rishon, Rosh Chodesh Adar Sheni. And what's the answer? It depends. What does it depend on? Did I know about the leap year at the time of my neder? If I didn't, then we assume the neder only goes until Adar Rishon. If I knew about it, then the assumption is it goes until Adar Sheni. And I will say what comes out then is that when you have knowledge of the leap year, the second Adar is the primary one, and the first Adar is considered to be the secondary one. Interesting. So I will say, I'll just point out, if you look at the Ran for just a moment, the Ran, Asamach Gimel Beis, the last three short lines in the Ran, Le'inyan Halacha, the Ran writes, Kevan Dekaimal Andre Me Rabbi Yehuda Lach Rabbi Yehuda. So we'll say, since in general we have a principle that's wherever there is a machlokes Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda, right? Therefore, the stama da Adar Rishon mashma. So therefore, I will say now, Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is that halacha l'maisa Adar Rishon is the primary Adar, right? And Adar Sheni is the secondary Adar. That's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Therefore, again, the Ran writes, Hilchach mishomid ba'adar sheni v'kosef adar stam hashtar muktam upasal. The stam adar rishon mashma. He'll say, so the Ran paskins that in a leap year, Rosh Chodesh Adar Rishon will be what we'll call Rosh Chodesh Adar Stam, and therefore, and Adar Sheni is, and second Adar is known as Adar Sheni. Now, the Ran is specifically mentioning this in terms of the dating of documents. So if you're dating a document, again, for Adar Rishon, you just write Adar. Adar. For Adar Sheni, you'll have to write Adar Sheni. That's how the Ran paskins ultimately like Rabbi Yehuda. So we'll say the Rambam says in the case of Nedarim, this is in Hilchos Nedarim Parak Yod, Halacha Vav, Shani Shosa Yayin Ad Rosh Adar, Im Haisa Shana Mubarak Solo Yadashi Mubarak Kishada and Asra Rosh Chodesh Adar Rishon. So we'll say, listen to this. So the Rambam accepts the distinction of the Gemara. If I make a neder not to drink wine until Rosh Chodesh Adar, so we'll say, if at the time of the neder I did not know about the leap year, therefore my neder only devolves until the beginning of Adar Rishon. However, if at the time of the neder I knew about the leap year, my neder goes until when? Rosh Chodesh Adar Sheni. So we'll say, so I want to point out something very interesting. So there's really two different halachas that are coming out here. There's the halacha by Nedarim. So halacha by Nedarim will say, it's pretty intuitive. In other words, at the time of my neder is governed based on what? Based on what I know. So if I know that it's a leap year and I say I'm not going to drink wine up until Rosh Chodesh Adar, then ultimately again my neder goes until Adar Sheni. If I didn't know about the leap year, then my neder only goes up until Adar Rishon. Interestingly enough, by shtaros, the Ran seems to the Ran paskins like Rabbi Yehuda, namely that for writing in a shtar, ultimately again, for writing in a shtar in a leap year, Adar Rishon is just written as Adar, and Adar Sheni is always written as Adar Sheni. So I both say Halacha Lamaisa. Just want to show you something. I forgot my Mishnah Brura, so I'm just going to take one right from here. Sorry. So I will say, I'll just tell you, there's two interesting applications of this. So first of all, halacha lamaisa in a ksuva. So today, at least by Ashkenazim, so today we write Adar Rishon, Adar Sheni. That's what we do. So if it's a leap year again, we identify the leap year as Adar Rishon, Adar Sheni. So again, the Ran, it could be that just practice has just changed since the time of the Ran. The truth is, I don't know if like you're doing like a heter iska or some other type of shtar. I don't know how we date it, but at least ksuvas, I know that ultimately, again, we did it as Adar Rishon, Adar Sheni. Now, also the other place where this comes up, which is a really interesting discussion, is in Siman Taf Kuf Samech Ches, a very interesting discussion. I will say, namely, what does one do regarding a yard site in a leap year? Right. So we'll say, so obviously, if let's say again, Ruvain lost his father Yaakov on Adar Beis in a leap year, so that's not a shaila, right? That's not a shaila. The question is, what happens if halacha lemaisa, Ruvain lost his father Yaakov in a regular year of Adar? He lost his father on the 5th of Adar, and now it's a leap year. So which Adar does he observe yard site in? So both say, so the Shulchan Aruch brings this down and says, Taf Kuf Sameches Siftes, sorry. Im ira yom misas aviv b'Shabbos or Rosh Chodesh yitchel lemachar. No, is this wrong halacha? Sorry, Sif Zayin. I'm sorry. Here we go. Kishiira yom shemes aviv o imo ba'adar v'ashana me'uberes. Person lost a parent, and let's say they lost a parent in a leap year. So then obviously we'll say that case is a little bit easier. Tana ba'adar base, fine. V'yesh omrim, dis'ana, so kishir yom shemes avo imo ba'adar, v'ashana mu'beres, dis'ana ba'adar base. The Mechaber paskins that in a leap year, yard site is observed in the second Adar. In the second Adar. Very interesting. The Ramah comes along and says, Haga, v'yesh omrim dis'ana berishon, im lo shemes b'shana sa'ibar shna, da'az, Nizar lis anas b'sheni, v'chein haminag lis anas b'rishon. The Ramah paskins that in a leap year, yard site is observed in the first Adar, not the second. Which I will say is in line with the psak of the Ran, right? Because the Ran says, even with the dating of shtaros, right? The Ran says ultimately again, stam Adar is Adar Rishon, and Adar Sheni is considered to be the add-on month for shtaros. So therefore, halacha l'maisa makes sense for yard sites as well. A yard site will be observed in Adar Aleph and not in Adar Beis. Now then the Ramah says, Miu yesh machmir lis anos b'shneim. Now I will say, he's actually quoting over here the minhag to fast on a yard site. That's really what this is. So the Ramah says, really you should fast in Adar Aleph, not in Adar Beis, but there may be an inyan to be machmir and fast in both Adars. So I will say, I'll just point out there something very interesting, that when it comes to observing a yard site in Adar during a leap year, there are essentially three different opinions. There's the Mechaber who says that halacha l'maisa, observe the yard site in Adar Beis. The Ramah who says observe the yard site in Adar Aleph, and then there are those who observe the yard site in both Adars. So just pointing out, it's one of these areas in halacha. Oh my gosh. Okay, where pretty much no matter what you do, the microphone's going to fall on the floor. Right? That's right. So pretty much no matter what you do, halacha l'maaseh, you're covered. But it seems to be, at least for Ashkenazim, the primary approach is to observe yard site in Adar Aleph. So therefore, I will say what we have over here, if we kind of frame it all, we have by Nedarim, if you knew about the leap year and you made a neder up until Adar, the neder goes until Adar Beis. You didn't know about the leap year, the neder goes until Adar Aleph. In shtaros, the Ram paskins that, like Rabbi Yehuda, namely that for the dating of shtaros, Adar Rishon is just written stam Adar, and Adar Sheni is written as Adar Sheni. For Ksuvas, we pointed out to you that halacha l'maisa we write Adar Rishon and Adar Sheni. The yard sites, the Mechaber says in a leap year, observe the yard sites in Adar Beis. The Ramah says observe it in Adar Aleph, and then the Ramah quotes an opinion that says one should fast or observe the yard site on both days. Incredible. Bosei Mishnah. Bosei, this is one long Mishnah now until the end of the parak. Very interesting Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Konim Yain Sheni Toim Ad Shia Pesach. Well, this is a very interesting case. Person says, I'm not going to drink wine, right? Wine should be ushered to me Ad Shia Hei HaPesach. Now, Bosei, if you remember again previously, when we saw that lashon of Ad Shia Hei means what? Until the end of something. Literally, I can't drink wine. Pretty much it's interpreted as long as it is still Pesach, which I will say would then put me where? At the end of Pesach. Here's the problem. So the Mishnah says, Lo niskavin ze ela ad lela Pesach, ad shah shederach b'nei adam lishtos yain. I will say, we circumstantially interpret that neder as saying, no one's making a neder not to drink wine through Pesach. I will say, why not? Why not? There's a of arbakosos. So the pashtos, what the Gemara is saying, what the Mishnah is saying is, we interpret his neder based on normative circumstances. So I know he used the lashon of ad shiyehei, which based on what we learned before would put you through the end of Pesach. But since people drink wine on Pesach, we interpret his neder as meaning up until the start of Pesach, up until the time when people normally drink wine. Certainly, Amar Konim Basar Sheni time ad shiyat som. But let's say a person says, meat is going to be ushered to me ad shiyat som. The tzom over here being referred to as Yom Kippur. So again, it sounds like what he's saying is meat should be ushered to me up through the end of the fast. So once again, they will say Eino aser ela ad leilet tzom really is only usher until meat until the meal before Yom Kippur. Shalom iskavin ze ela ad shasha derech b'nei adam le'achal basar. Because they will say people the suda mafsekes. The Suda, right, the meal before Yom Kippur is a festive meal, and therefore, again, halacha l'maisa, one is supposed to eat meat. So we reframe his neder, or we understand his neder as referring to asering meat up until the Suda mafsakis. So we'll say, what the Mishnah is introducing me now is, even though we've defined certain terms as meaning through the end of a particular event, when we see that that term contradicts the way people normally behave, we reinterpret his neder in conformance with normative human behavior. You make a neder ad shei through the end of Pesach. No, you don't mean through the end of Pesach. You mean up until Pesach. You make a neder to not eat meat up until the end of Yom Kippur. No. You mean up until the Suda HaMafsekes of Yom Kippur. Rabbi Yossi his son says, so konam shum shani tom ad shetehei Shabbos. But if a person makes a neder, I'm not going to eat garlic until it is Shabbos, which Shabbos would normally be understood as through the end of Shabbos. Shabbos say, Eino asr ela ad leili Shabbos. You're only asr to eat garlic up until Erev Shabbos, before Shabbos. Why? Shalom is kavin ze ela ad shosh derech b'nei adam le'achal b'shum. Because also remember, we saw this before, it was common for people to go ahead and eat, for men, to eat garlic on Erev Shabbos. Also remember, we learned this. Right, the power of garlic gives a man extra stamina. So because again on Shabbos night and Friday night there is a mitzvah to be with one's wife. So therefore again it was common to eat garlic on Erev Shabbos. So therefore again he makes a neder not to eat garlic through Shabbos. Once again we interpret that as being eating garlic up until Friday afternoon, Friday before Shabbos. So we'll say. So really, if you think about it, by the way, it's an incredible chiddush. So I will say, if you take a look at the Ran just for a moment, look at the Ran, second wide line, Shalom is kavin ze ela ad shosh derech b'nei adam lishtos yain dahainu ala la Pesach da'azlinan basar umdina. I will say, here it is. The Ran says, I will say, what's an umdina? An umdina is an established behavioral pattern. He says, Shalom is kavin. So even though the wording of the neder was that I'm not going to drink wine through the end of Pesach, I'm not going to eat meat through the end of Yom Kippur, I'm not going to eat garlic until after Shabbos. The Umdina says there is a normative human behavior, a normative pattern of behavior, established behavior, and therefore we reinterpret the words of his neder to be in conformance with that established pattern of normative behavior. Incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. Homer lechaver, a person says to his friend, Konam, Shani nana lecha im ein ata ba'avinot lebincha lebnecha kor echad shachitin ushtei chavil shayayin. So I'll say, let's say, again, watch this case. I say to my friend, I say to Ruvain, right? I am not going to get any benefit from you unless, of course, you come and you take from me a core of wheat, 2 barrels of wine for your son. Now we'll say, the Ran points out over here, what's really going on over here? I want to give Ruvain tzedakah, but I don't want to embarrass Ruvain. So instead, I framed the tzedakah as a gift for Ruvain's son. And I say to Ruvain, I will not get any benefit from you, Ruvain. I will not get any benefit from you, Ruvain, until you, Ruvain, come and take these things from me for your son. So what's the halacha? There's the ability to annul this neder even without a Talmud Chacham. How? The Yomer lo, because Reuven can say to me, I understand you made this neder for my honor, right? Because you want me to take these items. Zeu kvodi, it's my kavod to refuse the items. In other words, that Reuven could say, mission accomplished. You gave me kavod, right? You did this in order to give me kavod by wanting to give me all of these items. Kavod received. Kavod received, mission accomplished, and therefore such a neder could actually be annulled even without the intervention of a sage. In other words, we'll say, this is another chiddush, because normally we said that annulment of a neder can really only take place, halacha l'maisa, again, with a chacham. We understand when a neder is made for an explicit purpose, and that purpose has been served, the neder could effectively be annulled by itself. Similarly, I say to my friend, Konam sha'at nanisli. Now, I'll say in this case over here, I say, Ruvain, you cannot get any benefit from me. Im ein ata ba v'nosen libni. So this is the reverse case. I said, Ruvain, you cannot get any benefit from me if you do not come and give my son a core of wheat and 2 barrels of wine. Rameir says, Rameir says, okay, Ruvain can't get any benefit from me until he gives my son these gifts. The Chum say, the Chum say, no, even in this case, I could annul my neder without the intervention of a sage. And I can say, Ruvain, it's as if I received these items. It's as if I received these items from my son. Good. So we'll say, So it's an interesting case. Let's say a family member was putting pressure on me to marry my niece, right? You're allowed to marry your niece, right? So we'll say, so what's happening over here? Ruvain, they're putting pressure on Ruvain that Ruvain should marry the daughter of his sister. Putting pressure to marry his niece. Va'amar, konam shehi nanisli li olam. So what does Rose say? So what's great? So Ruvain makes a neder, right? He makes a neder, right? Konam, that my niece is never permitted to receive any benefit from me forever. The olam. So we'll say that's a good way to get out of a marriage, right? Again, in other words, Lamaisa, again, he says she can never get benefit from me. So what's that? Similarly, again, let's say Reuben is divorcing his wife, and he says, Konam ishti nanisli olam. My wife is not permitted to get benefit from me for all eternity. What's the halacha? Both the niece and now the ex-wife are permitted to get benefit from Reuven. Why? They both say the hana that he was referring to was what? Was intimacy. And he did not really have in mind to prohibit any other kind of. In other words, both saying both of these cases, Lemaisa, the neder was made to block marriage. The neder was made to his ex-wife when she was still his wife. So therefore, the hana that is being referred to over here is the hana of intimacy, but other forms of hana ultimately will be permitted. I will say, so this is just another example of how, what are we doing? So what's common denominator here? We're interpreting his nedarim in the context of an umdana. So remember again, umdana means a presupposition of an established norm of behavior. So therefore, what we're doing in all of these cases is we're taking his words and we're establishing or reinterpreting it in conformance with the umdana. So we'll say, listen to this. If Reuven is pressuring me to come to his house for a meal, and I don't want to eat by his house, whatever the reason, right? Maybe I feel he doesn't have enough food or whatever else it might be, and therefore I make a neder. I say, Reuven, I make a neder, I'm never going to enter into your home. I'm not even going to have a drop of cold water from your faucet. What's the halacha? I'm allowed to enter into Reuven's house. And I can even drink his cold water. Why? Because we understand what was the point of the neder. The point of the neder ultimately was that I don't want to join Reuven for a meal. How did I frame the neder? in a bit hyperbolic terms, exaggerated terms. I'm not entering into your house. I'm not even taking a sip of cold water. But Lamaisa, that was never the intention. Therefore, Allah Lamaisa, I could enter into his house. I could even go ahead and drink his cold water. What can't I do? I can't sit down for a meal of achila and shti of eating and drinking. Hadrun aloch, kanen bosai, shkoyach. Shkoyach and mazel tov. All right, Chevron, have a great day, everyone. So I apologize ahead of time.